All right, today we are going to try and piece together this giant jigsaw puzzle that is international trade. It's this invisible force, right? It fills our stores. It connects billions of us every single day. So let's dive right in. So why is your phone from China and your coffee from Colombia? I mean, have you ever really thought about it? The answer isn't just, well, that's where they make it. No, there's a really powerful economic logic behind it all. It explains why countries don't even try to make everything themselves. This huge global system of exchange, that's the reason your life is just packed with stuff from every corner of the planet. Okay, so section one, why don't we just make everything ourselves? Let's get into why trying to be totally self-sufficient is actually, well, a terrible idea from an efficiency standpoint. When you boil it all down, it's really just a simple give and take. On one side, you've got imports. Countries bring in stuff they can't produce very well, or maybe at all. For you, the consumer, that means more choice and probably lower prices. Then, on the other side, you have exports. Countries send out what they are good at making. And why do they do that? Well, it creates jobs, brings money into their economy, and gives their own companies access to these massive international markets. It's a two-way street. And really, if you want the one-word answer for all of this, it's specialization. Think about it. You wouldn't hire a plumber to fix your car, right? You'd hire a mechanic. It's the exact same logic for countries. Everyone is better off when they just focus on what they do best. And that simple idea right there is the bedrock of all global trade. All right, section two. Let's really dig into the superpower of specialization. It's all built on a couple of core economic principles that show why trade, in theory, makes the whole world richer. The first one is super simple, very intuitive. It's called the law of absolute advantage. Basically, it just says that if you can make something more efficiently, using fewer resources than anyone else, then that's what you should be making. Makes perfect sense, right? So take a look at this. This is our world before specialization. You've got Spain, which is great at making food, and Japan, which is a pro at making cars. But they're both trying to do a little bit of everything. And what's the result? If you look at the totals, the entire world is producing 20 units of food and just 5 cars. Remember those numbers. Okay, now watch what happens when they specialize. Spain goes all in on food, forgets the cars. Japan focuses only on cars. The new world total? 30 units of food and 6 cars. By just focusing on what they're best at and then trading with each other, they've literally created more stuff from the exact same amount of resources. That's the magic of absolute advantage in action. All right, that seems pretty obvious. But what happens in a situation that's, let's be honest, a little more realistic? What if one country is just better at producing, well, everything? Should the other, less productive country just pack it in and go home? The answer is a surprising no. And this is where a truly game-changing idea comes into play: comparative advantage. Now, this isn't about being the absolute best. It's about figuring out where you are relatively more efficient. It's about specializing where your advantage is the biggest, or, and this is the key part, where your disadvantage is the smallest. It's all about relativity. Let's look at another table. In this scenario, Japan has an absolute advantage in making both machines and cars. They are just flat out more productive at everything. So before they specialize, the world is making 60 machines and 20 cars. Logically, you'd think, well, Japan should just do it all, right? But wait, this is where that comparative advantage idea blows things wide open. Even though Japan is better at both, its advantage is huge in cars. And for Spain, its disadvantage is smallest in machines. So what happens? Spain goes all in on machines, making 40 of them. Japan goes all in on cars, making 30. Now look at the new totals. Okay, we have fewer machines, yes, but we have 10 extra cars. The total pie has gotten bigger. Through trade, both countries can actually end up with more stuff than if they tried to do it all themselves. The total value created is higher. That's the power of comparative advantage. Okay, so we know why countries trade, but how on earth do we measure it all? In this massive global economic game, how do we actually keep score? That brings us to section 3. Well, the main tool governments use is something called the balance of payments. The best way to think of it is like a country's financial scorecard. It tracks every single dollar, euro, yen, you name it, that flows in or out of the country for any transaction with the rest of the world. And this scorecard is basically split into 2 big categories. First, you've got visible trade.
That's the easy stuff. Physical goods you can actually see and touch. Think Irish beef getting shipped out or bananas from abroad coming in. But then you have invisible trade, and this is all about services, things you can't touch. Like when a band like U2 plays a concert in another country, that's technically an export of a service. And when you go on holiday somewhere, you're importing their tourism services. So what's the bottom line? It's pretty simple. If a country exports more than it imports, it's running a trade surplus. That means more money is flowing into the economy. If it imports more than it exports, it has a trade deficit. Money is flowing out. Now, you hear a lot about deficits being bad, but it's not always that simple. A deficit can also just mean that the people in that country are prosperous enough to afford a whole lot of cool stuff from all over the world.
Okay, so the economic theory is pretty clear. Free trade should make everyone better off, but we all know the real world is a lot messier. And that brings us to one of the biggest, most heated debates in all of economics: free trade versus protectionism.
So on one side of the ring, you have the arguments for free trade. People who support it will say, look, it's more efficient, it gives consumers more choice and lower prices, and hey, if we're all trading with each other, we're probably less likely to go to war. But on the other side, you have the arguments for protectionism. They say, hold on, we need to protect our own domestic jobs from cheap foreign labor. We need to shield our new infant industries until they're strong enough to compete globally. And of course, sometimes it's just plain old politics. And governments that want to protect their industries have a whole toolbox they can use. The most common one is a tariff. That's just a tax on an imported good to make it more expensive. Then you have quotas, which are straight-up limits on how much of something you can bring in. In really extreme cases, you've got an embargo, which is a total ban. Or you can just wrap everything up in so much administrative red tape that it becomes a massive headache to import anything at all. And believe me, this debate isn't just academic. It's playing out all the time. A huge recent example is Brexit, right? The UK decided to leave the European Union's free trade zone. A lot of people predicted it would be an economic disaster. But if you look at the data so far, the UK's GDP per person has actually stayed pretty much in line with other big economies. It just goes to show you how incredibly complex and unpredictable these things are when they happen in the real world.
So, with all these trillions of dollars zipping around the globe and all these competing interests, you can imagine things could get chaotic pretty fast. You need some rules, you need some referees, and that's where the big global institutions come into the picture.
You can think of them as the big three referees. You've got the World Trade Organization, the WTO. They're the ones who negotiate and enforce the rulebook. Then there's the World Bank, which focuses on funding development in poorer countries to help them get in the game. And finally, the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, which kind of acts as the financial firefighter, making sure the whole global monetary system stays stable. But look, not everyone is convinced that this whole system is really fair, and that skepticism has given rise to movements like fair trade. The whole idea here is to push for a different set of rules, ones that make sure producers in developing countries get a better price for their goods and have better working conditions. It's about prioritizing people and sustainability, not just pure profit. And that really brings us to the biggest question looking forward. The logic of specialization and comparative advantage has built this incredibly interconnected world we live in. But political pressures, global challenges, they are constantly testing the foundations of that system. So the real question is, in the years to come, are we going to build more economic bridges or are we going to build more walls? The answer to that is going to define the world for all of us.